Hi there once again. It's Teacher Kelvin or Sir Kelvin or Maestro Kelbong once again. So we have just finished discussing, of course, what speech is and how important speech is in our communication. We also learned the differences between language and the speech. All right. Okay, for today's lesson, we'll be dealing with the communication process and what communication is. We will also be learning the two kinds of communication and of course the two forms. We will also be talking about those important factors that make up the communication process. We'll be using a model later on that will help you understand more about the communication process. So how are you doing there? I hope that you are still doing your best, and I hope that everything is fine while you are doing your tasks on Genio. So we will be starting off again with the communication process. Let me share to you my screen. So we are still on the part of lesson 2 on what speech and its importance, but this will be the extension of this lesson. So do you always have hard time communicating with someone, or perhaps it's really hard to understand what people say? It's probably because you do not have the same kind of understanding. So in this lesson that we are going to do, I will help you to learn how to communicate with other people in the most effective way. So let's start. The communication and of course the communication process. What do experts say about communication? There is actually a lesson or a task that assigned to you on Genio regarding what do experts say about communication. So please get ready of your notes. Then you have to take it down or take down some important points regarding what these experts say about communication. So we'll be starting with the first expert. The first one is Nordquist. Okay, Nordquist of 2019 defines communication as the process of sending and receiving messages through verbal and non-verbal means. Take note of that. We have the verbal and non-verbal means. That also includes speech or oral communication, writing, and of course the graphical representation, such as, of course, the infographics, maps, and charts. And also the signs, signals, and even your behavior. Can you just imagine that? Or in other words, communication is said to be the creation and the exchange of meaning. So when you communicate with someone else, you try to observe how they move their eyes, how they talk, and even how they write or how they present in front of the people. In that way, you would be able to somehow observe some important points when you communicate with someone else or when you talk in front of the people. So that is according to Nordquist. It is creation and exchange of meaning. Let's move on to the next expert. Linguists such as Newman and Summer defined communication as an exchange of facts, ideas, opinions, or even emotions by two or more persons or people involved. Very important, right? We always do this one when you communicate with someone else, even your friends at this moment. Even if it's just text message, we always have that time to express or exchange our opinions, our emotions with someone else. That is according to Newman and Summer. The next expert is Hoban. Hoban, according to him, communication is verbal interchange of thought or idea. Take note, he only focused on the verbal interchange of thoughts and ideas. That is according to Hoban. The next expert is Anderson. Anderson says that communication is the process by which we understand others, in turn endeavor to be understood by them. So take note of that. We try to understand others because they try to understand us. So it's just a two-way process. I understand, I say something else, you should understand it. You say something else and I should understand it. That's what it means. It is dynamic. If you say dynamic, it is always active, it's changing, all right? Constantly changing and shifting in response to the total situation. So that depends on the situations that you are in. So when there is a terrible situation, you are expected to be somehow shocked or afraid. If you are in a happy situation, of course, you are expected to be very happy. Something like that, okay? Let's move on to the next expert. The next expert is Berelson and Steiner. Okay, Berelson and Steiner define communication as the transmission of information, idea, emotion, skills, etc. by the use of course, we have the symbols, the words, the pictures, figures, graphs, etc. Okay, it is the act or process of transmission, in fact. So take note, Berelson said, transmission of information using different kinds of modes. We have symbols, the words, the pictures, figures, and graphs. So we can communicate all of those things, right? Even the prints, the prints on your t-shirt, can you just imagine? There are meanings of those things. The signs that you do with your hands, there are meanings of that. Or even the movements, the gestures or the position of your hands on your face and so forth and so on. You try to communicate with all of these things. Okay, let's move on. Now, we heard some experts, right? What they or how they defined communication. Let me just have a recap of that. So the first one was Nordquist, who said that communication is the process of sending and receiving messages through verbal and non-verbal means. So that means communication is the creation of an exchange of meaning. That is Nordquist. The other expert is Newman, or these two people, Newman and Summer. They define communication as exchange of facts, ideas, opinions, and emotions by two or more people together. The other one is Hoban, who said that communication is purely verbal interchange of thoughts and ideas. And we have Anderson, who said that communication is the process of understanding others. And of course, also another process of being understood by others as well. So meaning, communication should always be dynamic because there is an exchange of ideas together. Okay, and lastly, we have Berelson and Steiner. They said that communication is a transmission of, or the process of transmitting information, ideas, emotions through symbols, words, pictures, figures, and graphs. Okay, now, so we are done with those experts. How about you? How about you? How would you define communication based on how those experts that we learned define it? Maybe you can come up with one important thing to define communication based on your understanding. Like I said a while back, there is a task on Genyo that you are supposed to be doing about the definition of communication according to experts and your own definition. So please look into that and try to accomplish it on time. Do you have any question? Probably not. Let's move on to the next one. Before we move on to the communication process, it is really important to remember that there are two types, okay, two types of communication. We call the verbal and non-verbal communication. So what do you think is the difference between verbal and non-verbal? Do you have any idea? Please write it down on a piece of paper or on your notebook for your answers. Okay, so we will be comparing your ideas to the ideas that we have here in our discussion. Let's start with the verbal communication. Verbal communication is done with words, either oral or written. I am really sure that you are inclined with this type of communication, especially that mobile technology has already improved rapidly over the past years. I believe that you are communicating or you communicate with your friends using your mobile phones. Am I right? Yes, so that is the reason why verbal communication can actually be done either oral or written or even now virtual, right? So that is verbal communication. The next one, nonverbal communication is done without words. We use pictures, graphs, diagrams, visual aids, etc. to communicate what we want to say. There are many pictures or memes that we see on Facebook or on social media, and they mean a lot. They put a lot of meaning to those things, okay? Even the symbols. For example, the rainbow color. This represents the LGBTQ, right? The LGBTQ community. What else? There are some symbols on flags, even the colors have meanings. When you give a red rose to someone else, that means love. So there are things that we want to emphasize when we use these figures, the pictures, graphs, or even the visual aids. We want to communicate something else. That makes it different from from the verbal communication. So when we say verbal communication, that is written or oral. But for nonverbal communication, we use the pictures, the visual aids, graphs, and diagrams to communicate what we want to say. So did you see now the difference between the two? Can you say that again? What do we say when, how do we define the two? Verbal communication is? That is right. And how about nonverbal communication? That is right. Very good. Let's move on to the next one. Another one for the nonverbal communication is that some other means to doing the nonverbal communication is through gestures, body language, the posture, the facial expressions, and even the simple eye gaze. So that is the reason why it's really important that we try to be cautious and be aware of the things that we put on our gestures and our body language, posture, the facial expressions, because all of these things could mean many things as well. Even though we don't talk, people would interpret it differently. Do you understand? I hope that you get that. Okay, let's move on. We have the nonverbal cues. There is also a task that is assigned to you on Genyo. Please check that out for your exercise. Nonverbal cues using gestures, body movements, and facial expressions are very useful elements in communication. Always remember that. They're very useful. Nonverbal cues are your gestures, the hand movements, the body movements, the facial expressions that you put on your faces. These all of these things are very important in communication because we call them your nonverbal cues. As a speaker, it is important to take note of some of these nonverbal cues. The ability to understand what these gestures and movements mean could help you in having a better communication with your audience. So later on, when you give your speeches or your presentations in front of people, you try to be cautious. Your actions, your gestures should be intact or should be something that is in match with your speech. It's not that you stand there, you just do whatever you want to do, you present the gestures that you want to have. No, you have to be very cautious as well. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Like I said a while back, there is a task on Genyo regarding the nonverbal cues. Please check that out and answer or accomplish it on a said date of submission. Let's move on to the next slide. There are also two forms of communication, like I said a while back. We have your direct communication and indirect communication. I'm pretty sure that you are familiar with these two things already. Can you imagine or can you guess what these two things mean or how these two forms differ from each other? You may start writing now on your notebook for some points. That's wonderful. We'll be using that one later on as we go on with the discussion. Let's move on. Direct communication involves one-on-one dialogues or conversation, like the times when you are talking with your friends or a family member, or when you are in a gathering where you can have a greater chance of communicating with a group of people or a big crowd. So you may expect a lot of response or replies for your messages or queries in there because you have a big chance to communicate with the different kinds of people. Have you ever been to a party before? It's very common in our culture, right? We always have this birthday parties. What else? We also have reunions where you can communicate with your friends or family reunion. So there's a lot of things going on in there. So big chance to communicate with each other. That is your direct communication. It is one-on-one dialogue, or sometimes even a big group, as long as there is a message and a feedback right away. Okay, that is your direct communication. Let's move on to the next. Indirect communication, on the other hand, does not involve any of those mentioned in your direct communication. It does not require any conversation at all. Really, this is done when you render a speech before a big audience or a group of people, and all they have to do is to watch you finish your talk, just like what I'm doing right now. I cannot hear what you are saying at the moment or what you are trying to ask me, but I am trying to communicate with you because you are learning from my lecture at this moment. This is what you call indirect communication. It is still a kind of communication, or I should say, there is still a communication in this process because you are learning from my lecture at this moment. When you are rendering a speech in front of your classmates and they are just looking at you, that is also a part of your indirect communication. They just want to watch you and listen to you and take down notes, some of your important points, and then later on finish. Let me just give you some other examples for this type or this kind of form. Another example for this would be viewing shows on your television. While you catch the message from that certain segment on your favorite TV show, your response may not be as important as the conversation you have with someone else. For example, while you are watching, your favorite TV drama, let's say Ang Provinciano, who among you here still watch Ang Provinciano on YouTube, right? There are some cases or instances when you know that someone is going to die in that section, and then you are just talking, hey, you have to move away, the enemy is coming, but they cannot hear you. That is still considered indirect communication. In other words, indirect communication is a one-way process, while direct communication is a two-way process. You see the difference now? I repeat, direct communication, it is actually a two-way process because there is exchange of messages with each other. When you talk to your friend, you ask a question, he answers. He asks questions, you answer. There is direct communication. While indirect communication is a one-way process. Just like this, you are watching me, you're listening to me, and you are taking down notes of the most important points regarding this lecture. This is what you call your indirect communication. Again, direct communication, a two-way process. Indirect communication is one-way process. I hope that sinks in, or that is really clear for you in understanding direct and indirect communication. Let's have a recap of the things that we have had. We learned about the two forms of communication. So what are those two forms of communication again? We have, yes, we have the direct communication and indirect communication. There are two kinds of communication, or two types. We have, yes, we have the verbal communication and non-verbal communication. There are also important things that you need to know in considering the communication process. But again, there is a task on Genyo that you need to finish or accomplish regarding direct and indirect communication. Please check it out and accomplish it on time. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, Let's do the communication process. Do you happen to know how the communication process works? Look at the illustration on the screen. We have there the message, decoding, interpretation, encoding, feedback or message, decoding, interpretation, encoding, and then back to the message. And take note, there should be a noise in between the encoding, decoding part, okay? Before anything else, before understanding the process of communication, let me just remind you some of the most important terms that we need to remember in understanding the communication process. Let's begin with the first one. Here are the terms that you need to look into in order to understand the process that takes place in communication. The first one is the sender. This refers to the person who wants to communicate. Let's say, for example, you are the person, you have a message you want to say, you want to tell to someone else. Or let's put it this way. Try to make a message right now and you choose one person in your house who would like to receive or who would you like to give that message. Okay, do you have that message now? Wonderful. Let's proceed to the next one. We have the message. The message is the information that the sender wishes to communicate. So you are the sender and I told you to make a message, right? Okay, you prepare that message, you write it down if you want, that is all right. Then we proceed to the next one, encoding. How the message is to be communicated. Is it verbally or written? I ask you to write it down, the message. It's up to you. You can give this message to that person or you can orally do it or verbally do it to this person. That is the encoding part. Let's move on to the next one. We have the channel. How this refers to how the message is sent. Example, is it face-to-face or by email? Or more commonly this time, we have the social media. We have, of course, the Facebook Messenger. We can also send messages on Instagram or even on TikTok, right? So how would you like this message to be transferred? Are you ready to transfer that message? I'm pretty sure. Let's move on to the next, the receiver now. The receiver now is the person to whom the sender sends the message. Have you chosen the receiver of your message? I'm pretty sure you already have someone in mind. So get ready. Please go to your person, to this person, and give the message. Wonderful. Decoding this time. The decoding is this actually refers to how the receiver understands or interprets the message. You try to look into that person's eyes and expression or probably the reaction of this person. How is it? Is it good? Or it's probably sad? Oh, I understand. Let's move on to the next one. We have the feedback. You try to get the receiver's response about the message that you are going to give. How did it go? Did this person say no? Yes? I'm happy? What do you want? Oh, let me know that later on in our activity. Let's move on to the next one. We have the noise. Anything that might interfere with communication or reduce the chance of successful communication. Was there a difficult time communicating with this person? Was there a certain noise that interrupted your communication? If you have not done sending the message or you have not prepared this message, then wait, we have a very special activity to do. This is considered your mini task. Your mini task is recorded under the performance task. Please make sure that you check out the guidelines that I put already on your Genio. Okay, so please check that out. We call this one your reaction recorder. So all you need to do is to prepare a thank you letter to the person you want to write to. It's probably your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your grandparents, probably your kasambahay or your yaya. It could also be your best friend or your neighbor, your cousin, whoever, even a dog, why not, right? Okay, so just prepare for that because that is part of your mini task, the reaction recorder. So all you need to do, all you need to have, of course, the letter, the video, because you will be taking a video of the recording, And of course, the guideline, you have to have it printed, or probably just have to copy it on your clean sheet of paper as your note, okay? And then prepare some of the guidelines. You just check it on the task on Genuine that I prepared for you. Better check that out, okay? Now, let's move on to the different steps of the communication process. This model will help you understand better how the communication process takes place, okay? So now that you have finally understood the communication process and the potential issues that can arise, let's now use the model to help you communicate more effectively. This can be done by following these wonderful steps. So there are different steps. The first one, begin by organizing your thoughts. So before you communicating or before you start writing your speeches, it's very important to prepare your thoughts, organize your thoughts. You already have the topic in there, but your thoughts are not organized yet. So it's important you have to organize. I'm helping you this time because you will be rendering a speech presentation later on. So this will help you a lot for this situation because we are doing now the indirect communication through a presentation, okay? That will be part of your PT or the big task. You just check that out on the task that I assigned to you on Genio. All right, let's move on. So begin by organizing your thoughts. Before you start constructing your messages, you should clarify the reason for your communication. That's really important. You can do that by answering these questions. The first one, who do you want to receive the message? What action do you want your receiver to take after receiving your message? And what information do you want the receivers or your receivers need the message to contain? So what part of your speech or your message you would like your receiver to keep, all right? So most probably it's about the message of your letter, perhaps, or your speech. If you're making a speech and I am the audience, what do you want me to remember about your speech? And if you are writing a letter to someone else, what do you want the receiver to remember about your letter? So that is really important. So that these steps will help you remember how to organize your thoughts before you begin your message. Okay, that's wonderful. So step one, begin by organizing your thoughts. Let's move on to the second step. The second step is composing and encoding your message. You're already done with organizing your thoughts and now you're ready to compose. Now you have the basic thoughts on the message formulated. It's time to compose your messages. So just all you need to do is to determine how you're going to communicate your message. Is it through face-to-face or is it via email or maybe social media like Facebook, Kakao Talk, Skype, Viber, what else? TikTok, Instagram, and so forth and so on. Is your audience knowledgeable about the topic in question? So if you are preparing a speech, do you think the audience knows about your topic? You should remember that. Does your audience prefer high-level, big-picture information or more detailed information about your topic? This will really help you in your presentation later on. You have to decide on this. Do you need to provide any supplemental information? Yes, always remember that you need to have a backup, right? So it's not just merely about what people say. You can also do some research about your topic. When you do the presentation, the first thing that you need to do is to research actually. You need to get some information or a lot of information about the topic that you have chosen. In this case, you would be able to know what you will be talking about in front of the people. And also this will help the people understand you and believe what you are going to say. Okay? Does your audience have any preconceived ideas or assumptions that could reduce the effectiveness of your message? You have to be ready all the time about the reaction of the audience later on in your speech. Sometimes some people or your audience would disagree some would agree, some would give you some suggestions as well. So you have to remember, respect and accept whatever they say, and try to address the issues or the questions properly. Can you think of any other obvious noise that might occur? If so, can you address it? So what are some other disturbances that might arise during your speech? What could be the possible interference that, that could arise? How will you do, or what will you do to address this one? So you have to be very ready about this situation. Okay, so compose and encode your message. That's the second step. The first step, you organize your thoughts. The second, compose and encode your message. Let's move on. Step 3, deliver your message. It is not just simply delivering or saying whatever you want to say. There are certain things that you need to remember as well. Now that your message is ready, then it's time for you to deliver your message. The following questions can help you deliver your message effectively. What is the right time to deliver your message? Do you always deliver a message anytime you want? Or you prepare it very well? Meaning, there's a certain period of time, there is even a day, and you know when to do it. Is there any way that you can reduce your receiver's distractions? Maybe there are some ways, right? You have to remember that. Next, step 4, receive feedback. Receiving feedback is an important stage in the communication process, okay? If you fail to gather feedback, then you won't be able to obtain any insights into how to improve this communication or future communications. So in this case, you consider the following questions. The first one, have you included the process for collecting feedback? You could simply ask directly or directly for feedback, or create a form or questionnaire for everyone to complete. Later on, when you do your presentation, and if you don't want to be disturbed, then you might as well tell your audience to write down any of their queries or questions on a piece of paper. Then they will have to pass it forward until you receive them at the end of your speech. Or if you really don't care about being disturbed during your speech, you may allow some people to raise their hands, introduce themselves, and right there and then they ask questions. Okay. Have you allowed time for questions and answers if you're giving a presentation? Like I said a while back, it's up to you as a speaker if you want to be interrupted in the middle of your speech. But for me, honestly, I would entertain questions at the end of my speech, because I don't want my ideas to be interrupted. There are some moments when my brain freezes because of the interruptions that the audience does, okay? So can you pick up from other signals, being given example, body language, or what's not being said? There are some things that when the audience is already bored, they start to be sloppy. They do like this one, or they start making some other gestures just to emphasize that they are already bored in your speech. So what will you do? What will you do to address this one? These are forms of feedback as well. If it's valid, then how can you use this information to improve your next communication? Okay? If things didn't go the way you wanted, what could you have done differently to achieve the response you wanted? So in order to avoid these situations, it's very important that you are prepared for your speech no matter what happens. You have to be really prepared and ready for whatever happens in the presentation. All right, so that is how you address or receive feedback correctly. Okay, so there are 4 steps. What's the first one? Let's have a recap. The first one is you organize your thoughts, right? Begin by organizing your thoughts. The second is composing and encoding your message. The third, deliver your message. And the fourth, receive feedback. So these are only the 4 important steps that you need to consider when you are delivering your speech. And I hope that this model will help you a lot. in doing your big task in this quarter. All right. So there is already a task that is assigned to you here on Genio. So I hope that you see it and analyze it for your performance task. Okay. And that concludes, of course, the discussion on the communication, the meaning of communication, the communication process. So we said that communication is definitely exchange of ideas, right? In many means or in many modes of channels, right? So we can use, of course, social media. We have, of course, the written, the oral, even the gestures. We also defined or identified two kinds of communication. We have, of course, what are those things again? Yes, we have the verbal and non-verbal communication. Then we also have the two forms. We have direct and indirect communication. We also learned a little bit or a lot about the communication, how it works. There are some certain people or things that are involved in the communication process that you need to understand. Okay, and we also learned about the steps that could help you preparing your big tasks, your presentations. Just have to check that on Genio. All right, so I hope that this lesson or this lecture will help you doing or accomplishing the tasks that are assigned to you on Genio. So good luck, do your best, and relax a little bit. Okay, thank you so much, and I'll see you again on our next lecture. This is again Teacher Kelvin or Sir Kelvin or Maestro Kelbong, your teacher saying, nothing is impossible when you believe that you can. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.